Thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste, the Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I am a therapist, and I have a special guest. I'm going to have her introduce herself to you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor. I am the founder of a company called Inner Workout and the author of a book by the same name. And I like to say that I develop leaders who care. All of my work is really centered around helping people approach self-care and personal development from like a skill building perspective so people can actually experience care in their daily lives.
That sounds so beautiful, but I knew from your bio, but I know people who have this mindset doesn't just come into this world that way. It would be nice, unless we were like in a Buddhist society. But if you grew up in America, you definitely don't come out with this idea of doing inner work. So I would love to hear about you. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing and what led you into this path.
Yeah. So for as long as I can remember, I've always been kind of high achieving, overachieving. And it's really interesting to reflect on this because my parents were always the type of parents who would say, like, just do your best. And if your best is a C, that's fine as long as it was your best. The problem was that my best ended up being like towards the top of the class. And I kind of internalized this idea that me doing my best meant that I have to be the best all the time. And that started to weigh on me really heavily. Um, Especially for me, it kind of came to a head after I graduated college and I was just in the workplace and had a job on the side or was building a business on the side and was getting married and was volunteering for nonprofits and was just getting burned out all of the time. And it was like all of those years of overachieving kind of caught up to me.
Well, so it doesn't sound like your parents were like, you got to get an A or you have to be the best. You're not sure like where that mindset came from, where you felt that that was what was being said. It was just something that you realized looking back is what you did.
Yeah, it feels to me like it was a very internalized
Mm.
situation where my parents were very supportive, but I was always putting a lot of pressure on myself, a lot of perfectionist tendencies. Um, I recently got diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and I do think that some of the rejection sensitivity and things that can come alongside with ADHD were present in my childhood, but it didn't manifest maybe the way that people typically think ADHD manifests. And so um, I definitely feel like there's a lot of hindsight is 2020 looking back now as an adult.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting because a lot of women, boys will get diagnosed earlier than girls. And there's more research with the boys, but all of my female clients that have gotten diagnosed were in their they were adults when they found out. And you're right, it's not you when we say typical like what you see on TV or um research. So what you're saying is like yours didn't look quite like the way that it may have been framed, which is why it probably was easily overlooked.
Yeah, like I remember a little boy in my class who got diagnosed with ADHD and and this was when terminology was different too. So it was like he was hyperactive and he had like his Play-Doh and these different things that he would do. And I
Right.
was bored a lot. I have inattentive ADHD. And I think it was a mixture of me being smart, quote, like it feels weird
Yeah.
saying that, but like kind of
No, but
above
I was
average
thinking that
in
you're
school.
definitely
Yeah.
above average. I can tell by the way you put that pressure on yourself. I'm like, I can tell you definitely perform at a higher rate on top of the attention deficit stuff.
Yeah. And then I also like my mom, the best way I can describe my mom is like she will come to my house and organize for fun. and like she loves going to the Container Store. So I grew up in a home that had a lot of structure. So
Okay.
again, I could kind of plug into these structures. And then once I was in college and had to build structure for
It was,
myself,
yeah,
and then once
that
I
was
was on my own and had to build structure for myself, it was like, oh, okay, maybe there are some
oh,
issues.
oh, so that makes sense because people that I work with, we talk about structure. So you pretty much had structure in school, even at home. So it was easy for it to be controlled. And then now you're out of college, you're a whole adult trying to create a life for yourself. You felt like, did you feel like you were failing? Did you feel like you were falling apart? What did that feel like, to the burnout that you were feeling?
Yeah. So when I first went to college, that was the first time I really felt challenged in school. So I definitely felt like I was failing because I was like, oh, I can't just like coast through this anymore. I have to actually pay attention and like try really hard. And then when I became an adult, I, it's so interesting because I think it wasn't necessarily a feeling of failing that I would describe it as. It was like this feeling of needing to prove myself. And so I'd
Right.
like keep putting more things on my plate to show
Yes.
like, look, I'm doing all of these things. I'm volunteering
Yeah.
over here. I'm
Yeah.
planning a beautiful wedding. I'm doing all of these things. And it was like almost this like rebelliousness that wanted to prove I could do all of it. And then,
Wow.
yeah, that would mean that like my place was messy a lot of the time because I was putting energy elsewhere. Or so there were
Yeah.
definitely areas of my life that were not the most supportive for me, but they weren't as public per
Okay.
se.
Yeah. Do you think, because I see this a lot with Black and Brown population of I think sometimes we put value on ourselves based off of our performance or what we're doing, and we don't really typically look at taking a break or rest as part of like life of trying to get through life. Do you think part of your mindset was because you felt like you had to be productive as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I grew up in a predominantly white school, and while I had friends of all different races, um, there were a lot of white people, and it was obvious that I was different, and I also had this sense that I think many Black people do when they're in predominantly white environments of, like, I feel like I'm representing my whole race, and so that's another pressure that was like, if I screw up, it's not just me screwing up, it's other
Right.
people who are now maybe potentially going to think something about my entire race. So
Right.
yeah, there was a lot of it goes back to that proving energy. Like, I have to
Yeah.
prove I'm good enough. I have to prove that Black women are good enough. There's a lot of like having a chip on my shoulder. And that doesn't even seem like the best phrasing because it's like society placed these like
We
um
don't know that though, right? Like it's not when you're looking back because now you're in a different space mentally. But when for people listening to this, it's important to know like society was not built for Black and Brown people. So I had a friend, I had someone say to me, their counterpart, their coworker, white coworker, was applying for this job that she was actually more qualified for. She said, "Why do I feel so overwhelmed by the idea of applying for something I'm qualified for?" And my coworker is just really confident. And I said, because this is the way that society uh, kind of was created, and so they grow up with the confidence. And for us, I think it's harder because we grow up, especially for you. Now that I know, like you grew up in a space predominantly white, it makes sense why you added that extra pressure onto yourself, despite like because sometimes it's in our home environment, but it wasn't your home environment. It was outside of your home environment, which for people listening is important to understand. Because I think sometimes as we're looking back, and especially parents, like, what did I do? How did this happen? And sometimes it's not just the environment at home. Sometimes it could be in school.
yeah. Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it because I don't know if I wanna have kids at this point, but, like, there's a lot from how my parents raised me that I do wanna emulate, but then,
Yeah.
yeah, there was the broader societal messaging that whether it was explicit or implicit, I definitely internalized, and it made me put so much pressure on myself.
Wow. So now you're an adult, you're planning this elaborate wedding, you're doing all these things. And like, what was that aha moment? Like, I'm burnt out. What does that look like? Because I don't know if I think people hit rock bottom before they realize it. I'm curious about what it looked like for you.
Yeah, the moment that it became I had bouts of burnout for like a couple of years of my early adulthood where it'd be like I would get so overwhelmed, I'd have so much anxiety, and then I would quit something and maybe I would be fine, or I'd take like a a day or a weekend off and then I'd feel stressed out again. But where I really see it as like a turning point for me was this moment after I was married and I was still having all of this stuff on my plate, but now instead of planning the wedding, I'm just like figuring out how do I live with another person because we didn't live together before we were married. And I was trying to plan out my week. It was a Sunday night. I was trying to plan out my week. I had like my planner, I had my laptop, and I just kept getting so anxious. And I was like, I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm not writing in my planner. I'm not putting anything in my calendar. I'm just sitting here stressing myself out. And so I closed my laptop and I decided to take a bath instead. And that was the first time that I started like building an intentional self-care practice, which is really funny to me now because I'm always talking to people about how self-care is more than bubble baths. But for me, like building in that time into my week where I was like, no, I have a shutdown time on Sunday. And from
Yeah.
Sunday evening to Monday morning, I'm not on email. I'm not on my phone. I'm just with myself. That
Okay.
was huge. And then from there, I was like, oh, what are the other ways that I can infuse this care throughout my days? Because the way that so often we're approaching self-care right now is like a band-aid where we're like, okay, go get a massage real quick. Okay, get your nails done real quick, but we're not addressing the structural changes that need to happen in our lives.
Dang, you're right. And so you didn't when you had you're definitely intellectual because you figured this out on your own. How could I build this? Or were you in therapy at this point, or was it something you just started to realize it worked?
I'm definitely paraphrasing. So I've been in and out of therapy since college. At that time, I don't think I was working with a therapist.
Oh wow.
Um, but what happened was I did this thing on Sunday night. It felt really good. So I was like, okay, I think this is just my Sunday night thing. And then
Oh,
I was wondering, like, okay, but that, like, what if I want to feel that way on a Wednesday afternoon at work? Like, I can't take a
that's
bath.
so good. Yes.
So how can I start to and so eventually the definition of self-care that I built and that I still use, it's what I talk about in my company and my book now, is self-care as listening within and responding in the most loving way possible. And for me, that was the major shift. Instead of
Yeah.
self-care being like this another to-do list, almost like a parallel
Right.
to-do list that I never
Right.
get done because I'm prioritizing everything else. It's a
Yeah.
conversation that I'm having with myself,
That's
and that,
so
like, changed the game for me.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. That's so good. I talk to people about, there's a difference with just surviving life and living life. And part of living life is like having that kind of system and routine that you're doing regardless of what you feel like, right? Because when as you're building it in, it's not like on that Wednesday afternoon when you have whatever you decide to do that day. It's not that you're stressed. You just even if you're feeling good, you're doing it despite what you feel like. And that's the beauty of creating that kind of system and doing that inner work is that it happens regardless of what you feel like. The same way people go to work when they don't feel like it, I say it's important to allow your system to replenish and rejuvenate on a regular basis. And like you said, we people will like tend to just put a band-aid on something. And it sounds like that's what you were doing, like when you would have those bouts and you would take a weekend off and feel fresh, but then go right back to you weren't really fixing the structural systems. You were just uh, putting a patch on something that really needed to go deeper inside.
Exactly. And to build on what you just said, I talk about proactive self-care and like reactive self-care. And I think sometimes we forget that, like exactly what you were saying. There are things that we do that we know get us to a desired end result, or they're almost like preventative for us. Like for me, how I spend my mornings, that's proactive self-care
Yep. Yeah.
because it like keeps me focused, especially with my
Yeah.
ADHD. It like gets my mind right. But then if I like have a moment where I get feedback that I wasn't getting expecting to get, and that kind of like bubbles up my rejection sensitivity, then I have these reactive practices to kind of bring me back to center. And we
Yeah.
need both types of self-care.
Yeah, we do. So now you create this system within yourself. You realize, like, I'm doing life all wrong. I need to fix this. And being the person that you are, I could tell once you put your mind to something, there's no stopping you. So you put your mind to it and you created this system. How did you go from thinking about you to thinking about other people with this kind of mindset? Because I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I think I just kind of started talking about my journey and what I was noticing. And then other people said that they were having similar issues, which honestly made me feel less alone because we do
Yeah.
live in this age where everyone's kind of like making themselves look good for social media. So to have other people say, like, no, I'm struggling with burnout too, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or it's hard for me to actually take care of myself, that made me feel better. And so I started talking about it and then kind of like teaching workshops and building more of a philosophy around it as well. Like I did yoga teacher training and I was introduced to this yogic concept of the koshas, which then inspired what I talk about is the 5 dimensions of well-being. And that was another like unlocking moment where I realized that caring for myself wasn't just caring for my physical body. And again, as I talked about that, other people were like, oh, yeah, I'm only really touching my physical body when I'm doing self care. What about the rest of me?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because I have that bookmarked. So when Taylor's talking about the 5 dimensions of well-being, and if you go to her site, innerwork.co, there's physical, energetic, mental and emotional, wisdom, and bliss. So we're familiar with physical. Can you explain to people when you say energetic, what does that mean for you?
Yeah. So every dimension has 2 or 3 subdimensions. And the energetic dimension kind of looks at how you are using energy and kind of moving energy through your daily life. I think of like the law of the conservation of energy, which basically just says like energy doesn't get created, it doesn't get destroyed, it just changes form. And I think
Mhm,
that's a good metaphor for how things are like happen in our life,
mhm.
where like we have a conversation and hopefully right now after this conversation we're both going to be energized, but we
Yeah,
also can probably think of conversations with other people that we have and it's super draining.
yeah,
And if
yeah,
we aren't having that balance of like being filled up and being drained, that's
yeah,
an issue.
yeah.
The other piece too is the breath.
With the energetic to explain, well, before you explain the breath, and I just want to say, because I talk about energy a lot and I don't think people realize just how powerful it is. So people will say, well, I got off the phone with this every time I talk to this person I feel drained, or if I've talked to this or I do this. And so part of the that energetic work is being mindful of the energy that's taking place when you're in certain spaces, when you're talking to people, because we don't realize there's a lot that we allow to take place energetically and we don't move it out of our system. So I feel like it gets stuck. And then when it's stuck, it just affects us in so many different ways. And because we're not dealing with something we can't physically see, it's easy for us to miss it if we're not pausing to pay attention to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you said that so well.
Tell people about the breath when you talk about the breath.
Yeah, I see that relating to energy as well. So, from like the yogic tradition, they talk about breath as prana. I mean, so many traditions in the world talk about breath as like our connection to life force because literally, if we're not breathing, we're not living for that long.
Right, right.
And unless you like, I grew up playing flute, so I learned how to use my breath to a certain extent. Some people are singers or swimmers, but the vast majority of people, we aren't taught how to actually breathe. And for me, I did in college, I did biofeedback therapy because the first diagnosis I ever got was generalized anxiety. And I remember learning how to breathe in a way that was supportive and calming for me. And like,
Mhm.
I was so fortunate to be able to get that. Most people don't understand how their breath can be like making them basically hyperventilate all the time and they don't realize.
You're so right. And when I started working on myself, and I remember starting yoga, is when I realized like, oh, I'm not breathing, or like I remember I started to pay attention when I would drive. I realized I was clenching my fist, and then I would relax, or then I started washing my hands and just being more like into the soap and making sure like I'm feeling my hands. But the breath part is where I started to learn about it. And now when I work with people, even though it's telehealth, once they're talking and stuff, I can see their labored breathing. And I pointed out, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it. And I was like, it's okay, let's just take a deep breath. And then just taking deep breaths like really centers us. And I feel like, especially if we're in a space where we're feeling overwhelmed, just sitting and breathing and paying attention to our body, it definitely like makes a huge difference. So what Taylor is saying is like so true.
Yeah. And breath
Uh,
is free. Like, we have to do it anyway. So why not do it in a way that's supportive for us?
I said that to somebody the other day, and I said, well, what was I doing? I wish I could remember right now. Oh my gosh. It was something I was supposed to do. And I remember they're like, oh, you're breathing. And I said, yeah, it's the easiest access I have to like resetting. It was something that I was a
Mm.
little like overwhelmed by that I had to do. I can't remember what it is right now, but I remember just taking deep breaths, and I said, this is what we have access to. And the person was like, you're right. That's so true. Like, it's so sad that it's not common knowledge and that we don't really think about it, but it's the quickest thing that we have access to is our breath, and it's free. You can't beat that.
Exactly.
So we have physical, energetic, mental, and emotional. So I know we understand that. I want to talk about wisdom. The dimension explores your relationship to your own inner knowledge. This is important. Tell people about this because I don't think people, when people come and see me, I do a really intentional job on empowering them so they don't think it's just about me in the session that's creating this like aha moment and the transitions that's happening. It's all the work that they're doing outside. And like I say, like we have inner knowledge, but because we live in a society that keeps us on the go, we're not paying attention to the signs. And so I like my goal and whatever I do is to just empower people to like trust
Mm.
themselves and to pay attention. So I love, I've never seen these five dimensions, but I love the wisdom piece and I would love to hear you share about that.
Yeah. So the wisdom dimension is, and it sounds like we're agreed on this. I really believe that everyone is their own best expert. And I find that so often we want other people to tell us exactly what to do. And we assume that the knowledge for what's next exists
Outside of
externally to us.
that.
Yeah. And it's like, certainly you can, like, if someone is working with you, it sounds like you're helping bring them back to themselves.
Yeah.
Um, but we can get lost in the sauce basically. And so for the wisdom dimension, it's the three sub dimensions are focus, which is about being present in the present moment. Then I'm missing one. Self trust,
Self
which
trust.
is making sure that you trust your wisdom, that you're building that trust with yourself, which for many people can take a lot of time because we may have been explicitly told, like, you can't trust yourself. You
Yep.
don't know what's right. I
Yep.
know what's right. That other person knows what's right. So learning how to trust yourself and then taking action on what you learn from your inner wisdom. And
Good.
I like to clarify that it's not about you being like this individualist person who's doing everything on your own. Like, we can and should be supported in this process, but all of these
Yeah,
things should be bringing people back to their wisdom and helping them take the action that makes sense for them. Because what works for you, what you need, what you're working towards is probably different than what I need and what I'm working towards.
exactly. Exactly. I love that. Right. And it's like, it's not about us just saying like, oh, we got this, we know everything, but really like, especially when it comes to our direction in life. And I realize so many people are feeling so stuck in life. And right, like I think that the way things are marketed for like healing and stuff looks like it requires a lot of money or and things that some of us may not have access to. So this messaging really, I think it can help people. And my goal, I started this podcast because I used to go online and talk about mental health. And people would think that because I was a therapist is the reason why I think how I think. And I would say, like, no, this is my job. And then I wanted to bring other people on that weren't therapists, that were doing work, working with people. And also just giving people an opportunity to have a modality where there's the podcast or my social media platform to learn some things and not use the barrier of not having insurance or not having the money to afford a coach or a therapist to be the reason why they don't continue to work on themselves. Because I feel like we're always working on ourselves. I feel like I just keep growing, and it's with intention. So I think it's really nice to hear the focus and the self trust and the action. Like all three of those things make so much sense, and that's how you do get the wisdom. In order to focus, you got to pause, and I know that can be challenging for some people. The last dimension I want you to touch on is bliss. So tell people about that dimension. Because again,
Yeah.
I've never seen these before, so I was like excited. I'm so excited you brought it up because I was going to bring it up anyways, even if you did.
Yeah, and I got excited when you say bliss because I think so earlier today I did get a massage. We're recording on the day of my book launch, and so
Wait,
that was like my treat to myself.
so you talk about bubble. You say it's not about bubble baths and massages, and now we hear Taylor got a massage today. No, I know. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm over here calling myself out, but yeah, it's like it's not only about those things, and those are great
I
celebrations.
know we're great.
Um, but the reason I bring that up is because before I did this work, I thought bliss was like the feeling of a bubble bath or the feeling of like getting a foot massage at a pedicure, and almost this like disconnection from yourself. You're like, oh, it felt so good. I like wasn't in my body. And actually, I think that bliss is about really deep connection to yourself and like a really true expression of yourself, connection to your communities, and connection to something bigger than you, whether you do that through religion or spirituality or being in nature.
Yeah, that's good. For me, nature definitely does it. It's like once I pass water, when I'm in the woods and hiking, it's like I tell people I can't describe the feeling. It's like a different, I'm breathing different. Like I just feel so happy. And, I'm 40 years old and I never thought, like, I tell people, 15 years ago, you couldn't have told me like I was going to be talking like this about being in nature and feeling this blissfulness feeling that I feel. And so I'm glad that that's on the, I'm glad the way you framed it because you're right. It's deeper than the foot massage for that moment or the massage. Like it's really that deep connection that you have, like spirituality, nature, like those things definitely is. I could be in my own like world listening to something and I just feel so warm inside just by the energy of the music or the person that's talking where I'm like, oh, that's right. Or I'm reading something and I just feel that connection. And it's the connection that can't, you got to work for. I feel like it's not like when I say you can't pay for it, yeah, you can get a therapist or somebody, but doing the work, the inner work, speaking of inner work, right? Doing that inner work is where you're going to be able to create that feeling, and it's within. And I think our country gives a lot of messaging where everything feels like it's external. It's the phone, the marriage, the car, the house. And it's not those things, I promise you, because we're one of the richest nations and we have such a high rate of anxiety and depression. I promise you it's not the external things. that creates those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love how you described it, and I feel the same way about nature too. Like, it's so healing and important to me to spend time in nature, and the only other thing that I'll add is, so I actually towards the end of last year, like, had another bout of burnout, and there's a lot of shame that and stuff that I had to deal with because 'cause I'm like, "Shouldn't I be past this? Like, shouldn't I have gotten over it?" But when I think about burnout, now when I talk about it, it's a state of deep disconnection because, like, how I get to the place where I'm burned out, I'm disconnected from myself. I'm disconnected from at least one of my communities. I'm disconnected from, like, a bigger purpose, something bigger than me, and so healing from my burnout was a lot of work in the bliss dimension and reconnecting to myself and the things that support me.
Wow, thanks for sharing that because that you're absolutely right about the burnout piece because it's when people stop their process, right? When they stop that structure, the structure that you build, and I'm assuming it was when you was working on your book, probably when you probably because this is something new, like doing the book is a new venture, and you probably stopped things little by little before you knew it you're in a stage of burnout. And it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's something that over time, I'm sure you rationalize, oh, I can do that tomorrow, or that can wait because I have to do this, right? So I appreciate you sharing that piece because I'm like very transparent, and I think it's important just because like you're doing this work and helping others, and I'm doing this work as a therapist doesn't mean we're not human, right? It doesn't mean that we're not going to have the same experiences that you have, and so it's good that you shared that. So thank you.
Yeah.
So tell people about the book. Like, how did it come about? Because we understand why you were so passionate about self care and not making it into this pretty little box that we tend to see, but really like doing the work, the inner work. I love the name of it, by the way, inner workout. Because we know about the physical workout, like, and how our body can transform and so many things can happen, but the inner workout is literally the same thing. If we do the inner work the way we think about the physical work, a lot of transformation can take place, which can lead to so many other amazing things for us.
Yeah. Well, I was really fortunate in that someone from my publisher reached out to me. I had a digital workbook for sale and they bought that and they were like, "Oh, this is really good. Like, would you want to write a book?" And it's been kind of like low key one of my goals for a while. And I was did
Oh,
not think it was going to happen then. So that was really cool. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, my business used to have a really different business model and used to focus on this practice that incorporated movement and journaling and breath work and was trying to get people to experience the five dimensions of well-being in one like 60-minute or 45-minute session. And it launched like 6 months before the pandemic hit. I was planning to do all this in-person stuff, couldn't do any of that. And I was like, but people need self-care more than ever. So I built this assessment um, that measures people's well being across the five dimensions. And the book really builds on that assessment. So I kind of talk about it as like a strengths finders for self care, where you are encouraged to take the assessment and
yeah.
then you get your results and then you can read the book front to back or you can do choose your own adventure where you're like, ooh, the subdimension that I need the most support with is aligned action under wisdom, so let me flip back to the wisdom chapter, read about that and do some of these practices. Or again, you can read it like front to back. And so I'm excited because I'm super passionate about making this work, making it practical, making it accessible. Like the Kindle version of it is only like $8, I think, and making it intersectional. Because another thing, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I find that so much of the conversation around healing and personal development, it can just be really focused on white people. It can really be focused on people with a certain amount of financial privilege. And I wanted a book that like more people could see themselves in.
Yeah, so like even if they couldn't work with you as a coach or attend any of the things you're attending, like having access at a you're just trying to make it so there's different ways that people in different socioeconomic statuses can have access to this work, because it's for everyone. The work that you're doing, especially people here in America, because of the way that we kind of were brought up, whether explicit or implicit. We were taught that we got to work and we just got to keep going, and no rest. And so people are miserable, and some people can't see their way out of their own like stuckness. When I think focusing and pausing can create more awareness in that arena for people. So that's awesome. I'm so happy that the book is out, and your passion. Like, I love hearing the background story to how people got to this place, because one, it shows people that you're human, and people don't think like, oh well, that's Taylor, because Taylor got it like that, she's smart. But it helps people understand that. And also for people that may be venturing onto like a new career path or trying to create their own, I think something like this, what you did, you didn't say you were going to be this entrepreneur and do this. Like, you realized like this was your passion, and you kind of started this work. So it's really like an amazing story to hear for people, and for me too.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, it was such a winding journey, and it took a while to get here. So whenever someone's like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. It's inspirational." I'm like, "Yeah, and just so you know, like there's been so many ups, downs, lefts, rights, twists, turns, surprises." So just know that if you're going through all of that, that is a part of the process too.
Yeah, because and I tell people on social media, I'm not gonna be on here like, I'm not sharing like my struggle, right? Like, I'm sharing the content, and you share your content, but it's important to know like social media shows highlighted reels, and if you're comparing your life to a highlighted reel, you're doing it all wrong. And so I love these stories where people understand it's not a straight line, right? There may be some winding in the road, and then I notice what you do is you pause and you think about it and you reset. That's something that it sounds like you've done your entire life. Like, you've been able to like reflect and think about what you need. And this is things that I talk to people about doing. But you just did it so much early on, and now you're here. So thank you for sharing your story. If people wanted to purchase the book or follow you, how could they do that?
Yeah. So if you go to innerworkout.co, there's a button right there. You can order the book or just search wherever you like to buy books. It'll be there. If you want to see more of me, I'm on Instagram at Taylor Elyse Morrison. That's Elyse with a Y. Inner Workout is on Instagram at Inner Workout. I will say we don't post a ton in either of those places. The best place to like consistently stay in touch is the newsletter called Self Care Sundays, and you can sign up for that on the website.
And don't forget about your podcast. You just celebrated 100
Oh, yeah.
episodes. Come
I do
on.
have a podcast. Thank you for
You
that.
do.
I do have a
And
podcast called
yes, I've listened to a few episodes. Go ahead. You just celebrated 100 episodes. Congratulations. That's so awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a podcast called Inner Warm Up, and we just switched it to seasonal, me trying to practice what I preach and not burn myself out. And the
Okay.
last season was all about burnout. No pun intended. But yeah, so I got to talk with people on all different kind of aspects of burnout and share some of the tools that I use to work through my most recent bout of burnout. So yeah, I've been getting great feedback on that season.
And even though it's seasonal, the stuff that you and I do, it doesn't matter when you listen to it, it's always like something that's needed. It's not like current events or like, things that you like, sports, right? This is stuff that, regardless of if it's in season or not, like, listening to it will help with the process, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And she's very practical. What I love about your content is that it's very practical. It doesn't feel like it's over my head. Especially with you being such an intellectual, you can easily like talk above us, but you really talk directly to us, it feels like, and it feels like, oh, I can start this right now. That's the thing that I want people to always take away from, and to hear it on your platform, and just to see the work that you've done. You really want people to just be able to start right now and not feel like there's barriers to the process. So I love that for you. So thank you.
I'm receiving that, because that's really my goal, is like, yeah, here are the tools, you can do it. And yeah, sometimes I do notice myself. I'm like, I'm getting a little. My mom used to be an English teacher. Sometimes I'll bring out what my dad calls $13 words, and I'm like, no, bring it back for the people.
Yeah, like I'm the people girl, because it takes me a while. I tell people I have to read, listen, take notes in school. I was a slower learner, but I made it work. And so, like, I know your stuff is for us. I'll let people know, like, if I can get it, y'all can get it too. Before you go, I just need to know, since we are talking about the self-care and stuff like that, what does your routine look like for people that may be curious about what keeps you going?
Yeah. So my self-care changes all the time. I will say that moving towards this book launch, and like I said, today is the day my book comes out, the day that we're recording it. I've been really doubling down on my morning routine. When I first got diagnosed with ADHD, I kind of like gave myself over to it, and I was like, oh, my brain like isn't necessarily super structured. I guess I don't need structure anymore. That was very bad. And so now I'm back into a more structured morning routine where like I get up, I move my body, and that could be like today I did a strength training workout, but sometimes it's like I'm just stretching for 5 minutes. I meditate. I'm rebuilding my meditation practice, so I'm only at meditating 5 minutes every morning. And then I have like my different like vitamins, supplements, and stuff that I'll take. And then I walk my dog. And that's been like such a beautiful way for me to start my mornings. And I really try, I'm not perfect at it by any means, but I really try not to be on social media, not to be on my email until I've at least done those first few things.
Oh, that's good. I love that. Moving your body is really good. That'll definitely move some of that energy out. That's like lingering for people that might be listening. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your time. This was such an amazing conversation. I hope it feels like I got something in my mouth, or is that my screen? Sorry.
I
I
don't think
really
you do.
hope. No, it's the screen. I really hope that this was okay for you. I didn't realize today was the launch day, so I feel super special to be able to have this conversation with you on the day, because I'm just really excited for you. Even before I spoke to you, I can just tell by your presence on social media, your website, and the book. I can just tell like your energy was going to be like this. So, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because it's very inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, this was so good. When they booked it, I was like, "Do I want this?" But then I looked you up and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be a good launch." Like, I wouldn't talk with
Oh,
anyone on my launch day, but I was like, "Oh no, we're gonna vibe. It's gonna be
oh,
good."
good, good, good. Oh, that makes me excited. Okay.